Hello my friends. I'm going to show you how to make the Native American teepee, and we're starting by doing the teepee cover. I'm using a white waterproof canvas. The cover alone will take 46 yards of 5-foot wide canvas. Here I'm laying the canvas sheets together in preparation for stitching. I'm going to run 3 rows of stitching in each seam. From the center point of the canvas, I'm drawing an arc. This will give me the layout of the teepee. I'm using a wire so that there won't be any stretching when I'm putting tension on the line that's drawing the arc. If you measure correctly when you lay out your sheets, you'll have minimal waste. So that's real important when you're paying quite a bit per yard of your fabric. Here I'm laying out the smoke flaps, and this is the center line to the arc. Now make sure you measure twice before you cut. And you can see here I already made a mistake. Okay, the smoke flap extends 34 inches from the outside edge. So when we cut this, we need a center point which is 10 inches long, this triangle, and that's what gets tied to the lifting post. So that's going to be reinforced. So this tongue is going to be left on. But we're going to cut down these outside lines all the way to our center point on both sides. And you can see here that the double lines where I made the mistake. So glad I caught that before I cut it. Measure twice, cut once. Okay, now I measured 34 inches from the outside seam inward. That's the inside edge of the flap. Okay, and the smoke flap is 8 foot 6 inches long. So when I find that location, I'm using a drywall square to give me a perpendicular line. And again, this line is 34 inches in. I'll do this on both sides. That's a cut line. After you double checked and triple checked your measurements, you're ready to cut. So here we're cutting this 34-inch line. Cutting this is on the center. And this is the tongue that's going to be left to tie to the lifting post or lifting pole. And this tongue is going to be reinforced with 2 or 3 layers of canvas. And that will be determined. I'm going to use 2 more layers. That's determined by how heavy your canvas is. And I'm going to extend it from here. I'm going to make a triangle and extend it about 18 inches further down. And that's holding all the weight of the canvas when you're lifting it. So that's an important part. Now this reinforcement area here for the lacing pins, this is going to be seen on the inside of the teepee. So I don't want to leave a raw edge. I'm going to add about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch for a hem. So I'm not even measuring this. This will be tucked under. This is going to be my cut line. The door opening is going to be in this area, and it'll be an arch. I'm not going to mark that out yet until I have this cut and the seams folded. That will allow me to keep a straight line between the two, and it'll be less confusing. So now I'm going to cut on this outside line that I just drew, and this is marking the hem. Okay, the lines that we have here, this is the cut line, this is the bottom of the smoke flap. Then we have the small hem that's going to go on the inside, and then the 4-inch hem that supports the lacing holes, and then the center, this area right in here, will be where the lacing pegs will be. I'm going to extend this cut line right up in halfway into that lacing area. So that's going to be approximately 2 inches. So that's where this cut will terminate right here. That will be the middle of the lacing pegs. And this is where the flaps, the smoke flaps from both halves, are going to meet right here in the center. 2 inches. Double check my measurements, and now we're cutting the bottom of the smoke flap. And that extends up to that point. Right there. Okay, now this piece that we just removed, when you laid out your original pattern, if you're slightly short on the length, trying to optimize the material that you have, this can be sewed together from both sides to make a long strip, and then that can be sewed to the bottom of the cover to give you almost a 2-foot extension. What we need to do with the smoke stack, or the smoke flaps at the top of the teepee, because at the top there's going to be a cluster of the poles and it gives a volume. We have to make an adjustment to the smoke flap by putting in or inserting what's called a gore. And that is going to be inserted right in this area, and it's going to be a cut 39 inches long. And what's going to happen is we're going to sew in a piece of material, a wedge, and that will give us an extension to be able to wrap the TP cover neatly around the cluster of poles, and the smokestack will look the same dimension from the top to the bottom. Right there. And it'll be a long wedge and open up about 6 to 7 inches. The sewing machine that I'm using to put this TP together is an old treadle machine. I bought it a number of years ago for $25, and the machine works like it's brand new. If you can get something under there, it'll put the needle through it. I've used it to sew leather in the past, and it's sewed so far all the canvas without missing a stitch. Now, I bought bulk thread. I'm using a number 90, which is a really heavy thread. It's really tough. I haven't broke a needle or thread as of yet, and I have most of the sewing done. For the machine to hold this, I turned on my lathe a little spindle that inserts into this spool, and there's a small hole that goes onto the bobbin carrier. And it works perfect. This is the reinforcement area for the peak of the Tipi, and I have it doubled, that's why it's pinned together. And this is 2 tags. This will be split here, so these are what will be tied around the poles of the Tipi. And this is extending down into here, right here. So this is going to be sewed into the reinforcement. The reinforcement will then be sewed onto the Tipi. So I'm going to stitch this together, and then we'll put it onto the Tipi cover. Here's the top of the Tipi cover and the tie point. You can see I split that. When I folded it, I have each one of these halves triple layered. And I split it after I sewed it to make it easier. There's a pin I forgot. And the reinforcement I sewed on the underside of the cover, so that'll be on the inside. And it was doubled, and you can see the stitching. And I extended it down 18 inches to the bottom. Here I'm cutting out the gores, and what I want to take note is this is the curve of the bottom of the Tipi. And I'm laying a straight line on here, and what this is doing, this line is crossing the threads. This is the direction that the threads are running. So this cut is on a bias. This cut here is also on a bias. You can see the edge of the sheet of canvas. And right here, it's cutting across. And the reason I'm doing that, this is an intentional thing, is this will keep the threads from unraveling. Minimal amount of unraveling being cut on a bias. And the other thing is, I'm cutting this, the cut in the flap on the top of the Tipi is 39 inches. This is 40 inches, and it's also terminating at a flat rather than a point. It's 1 inch flat. The up there is 7 inches. So this is allowing for a 1/2 inch hem or 1/2 inch overlap when I sew it, and the cut in the smoke flap is going to end 1 inch short of here. So this will reinforce to keep that edge from tearing. So we need to cut 2 of these. Here's the peak of the Tipi and the smoke flaps. And here you can see I have the gores pinned in, ready to be sewed. And like all the other seams, I am putting a triple seam to support it. This is how I laid out the doorway. And this rule is setting on the fold where the hem is. This outer portion here is all hem. That'll be folded inward up to here. And what I did from this edge up this far is 10 inches. So I laid out a line at 10 inches, and then I drew an arc and made a cardboard pattern, and that sets on the outer edge. and it goes inward up to the 10 inches, and it's oval shaped, so that part will be cut out. Here's the inside of the door, and you can see I have a reinforcement in here. This is the inside. On the outside, you see I have it oversized. After I sew it, I'll trim it to the actual size. And then underneath the door is that 4-inch reinforcement for the pegs. So that's folded over, and there's a 1/2-inch hem here that's tucked under, so there's no frayed edges. And again, this outside edge, this piece is cut on the bias, so it won't fray. You won't have threads coming off of it. And I have it all the way up to here, and this will be the next step. I have to fold that hem. That's the peg strap where all the pegs go in. Okay, now I'll get it to the machine. This is the lacing strip, and there's pairs of holes right here. I'm punching the holes with an arch punch, and these holes are a 1/2 inch. Now when you use an arch punch, you want to back the holes up with a heavy block of wood, and I'm using a closed grain. This is a chunk of beech, but maple would also work good too. If you have a soft wood, it makes an indentation in the wood. It doesn't make a crisp cut. We're going through 3 or 4 layers at this point. This went through actually 5 layers right here. Okay, now with the arch punch I have an X, and I can sight down through the arch and get that as close as I can to have that X on the center of the arc. Let me double check since I moved it. Right there. As I hit the punch, I kind of roll it so that it will hit around the perimeter. Then of course you got to clear that out if you want to see where your next hole is going to be. Takes it out nice and clean. Now it's ready for a grommet. And then I'm sewing grommet. I'm using my wax thread to sew grommets in this, just like a sailmaker would do. And they're very neat, and I like them much better than hammering in a brass grommet. And here is some of the grommets. And after you stitch these, it compresses the canvas in the hole, and this hole now is larger than a 1/2 inch. And at the very bottom there's one hole in the center, and this is where a stake is going to go in. And I punched a 5/8 inch hole there, and it opened up to about a 3/4 inch. And I'll show you how to do those hand stitch grommets with the wax threads. This is the blueprint to the Tipi cover. You can hit pause to study in more detail. Thanks for watching, my friends. Bye-bye.